Okay, all right, we're live. Hello, everyone. Good morning and good afternoon, respectfully, wherever you're at. Um, Please, everyone, feel free to say hello in the chat box and just say where you're tuning in from. It's good to see everyone here um, joining us. So, people are going to be kind of fouling in a little bit over the next 20 minutes or so. But we wanted to just kind of start with a little bit of practice, just a little bit of grounding practice, and then we'll move into our conversation for this session. All right. Um, so to begin with, I just really invite you to just turn your attention back into the space that you're sitting in. And I invite you to notice that you have a body, that there's a physical expression of your self in this moment. You don't have to notice sensations of the body or anything. We're just simply just acknowledging that we are embodied. And to go a little further, I invite you to just reflect on the experience of your body as well. What does it mean to experience the body? I invite you to continue shifting your attention down to your seat and just noticing the weight of your body, noticing the sensations of your body making contact with the seat. If you feel resourced enough, I invite you to just turn your attention slightly to maybe noticing the ways in which you may be energetically kind of shutting down, like the ways in which some of us move through the world kind of crumpled over and balled over energetically and also physically sometimes, but noticing the ways in which our energy, feels kind of like balled up and tight. And if you can, I invite you to just kind of relax that energy. And this is the way that I do it. I just bring my palms together. I inhale deeply. As I exhale, I just imagine that as I exhale, I'm separating my palms and kind of spreading out this energy. It's almost as if I'm spreading out my energy body. So it begins to take up the same space that my physical body is taking up, right? And so you may actually begin to experience an opening of the heart center. And that will feel really exposing, really vulnerable. But keep doing that as much as you feel is appropriate. Just like inhaling, preparing for the opening, and then exhaling, like letting that energy body spread out, open, expose itself. So you begin to take up not just the physical space on your seat, but you begin to take up the energetic space as well. And just for now, we just want to keep our energy body in line with our physical body. But just allowing yourself to take up space on the seat, exposing yourself in the space. This is how the light gets in when we open. And this opening helps us to start building a relationship to spaciousness around us as well. So I know trauma and heartbrokenness and fatigue, much of what many of us are experiencing right now, all of that needs space. It needs light to be cared for. So opening up. Now I invite you to actually shift your attention and allow your attention to actually deepen down and touch down into the earth under you. And again, the floor under you, no matter what floor of a building you're on, the floor is an expression, is an extension of the earth itself, the element of the earth, which is foundational, sustaining, solid. So touching into that elemental expression of the earth and allowing the earth to touch you back. As the earth touches us back, the earth is actually holding us. As the earth holds us, the earth is loving us. In that love, allow the earth to be alive, to be conscious. Allow the mother to express herself through the earth, through the land. If you're feeling heartbroken and tired and overwhelmed, I invite you to imagine just taking this heartbrokenness, whatever you're feeling, the anger, the rage, the frustration, just imagine that you're just offering this burden down into the earth for the earth to hold. Just let the heartbrokenness fall into the earth and let the earth hold it. The earth is there to hold us. And let it hold, let her, the mother, hold our brokenheartedness. And at some point, we have to stop holding on to everything. We have to stop holding on to it, and we have to stop self-identifying with the suffering so much. We are not the nature of suffering. We are not suffering. We're not inherently miserable and traumatized. These are experiences. These are experiences that move through our minds, through our bodies. They are experiences, not fundamentally who we are. I invite you to shift your attention up into your heart center now. And I invite you to begin to reflect on something or someone that you're grateful for right now. And I just encourage you to allow that energy of gratitude to begin to just grow within the heart center. It's like you're sparking a flame, right? And we will begin breathing in and out of the heart center. As we breathe into the heart center, it's like our in breath is just feeding into the energy of gratitude, helping it to grow. It's like oxygen feeding into a flame, or like pouring gasoline on a fire. Very similar. We're just igniting the energy of gratitude so it begins to circulate through our experience of mind and body. I wonder if you can just sit within this energy of gratitude and let this energy of gratitude just simply hold you right now. This gratitude is just an expression of the mother, or of God, or of our Buddha nature, whatever is appropriate for you to think about. It is an expression of a higher source, a higher divinity, the essence of who we are. And if you need to, just allowing your heart to break within this energy of gratitude, within the arms of gratitude, which for me is just the arms of the mother. And now I invite you to shift your attention into your experience of mind, noticing thoughts and emotions, noticing the flow of mind, invoking our shamatha practice, our calm abiding practice, which is simply investigating how mind is, how mind shows up. I wonder if you can imagine your mind being a vast ocean, this vast, beautiful, clear ocean, like the most beautiful ocean you've ever seen. Imagine that you're walking down the beach to the edge of this ocean, which is simply your mind. And allow the ocean to be without boundaries, limitless. It expands and stretches out into the horizon as if there's no end to it. And how the water is clear and pure without defilement. And on top of this ocean, you may see waves and ripples and movement on top of the ocean. If you look deeper into this ocean, you see at the very bottom of the ocean, there's nothing but stillness, clarity. I wonder just for a few moments if you can both tune into this depth of stillness and clarity while also holding space for the movement and the turbulence on top, on the surface of this ocean of mind. Because in stillness or emotion, it is all just your mind. Can you touch into the oneness of how mind may show up in various ways in this moment? I invite you to turn your attention once again into your thoughts and emotions. And I invite you to identify, the ones that you're really struggling with right now, whatever it may be. Maybe the energy of sadness or despair or frustration or just maybe energy of fatigue in the mind, the rage, or maybe the confusion, the apathy, the numbness. Just noticing those experiences of the mind, be it thoughts or emotions. Once you begin to notice them, I invite you to imagine that you begin to transform these really tough thoughts and emotions and energies into flowers. into the most beautiful flowers you've ever seen. Maybe your favorite flowers, maybe all kinds of colors of roses, birds of paradise, tulips, lilac. Imagine that your mind just begins to be filled with these beautiful flowers. They're just everywhere. And when you're ready, I invite you to imagine just offering these beautiful flowers onto the ocean of your mind. I want you to just gaze out over the surface of this ocean that you've offered these beautiful flowers onto, and just see these flowers floating on the surface of your mind, the ocean of your mind. You're not grabbing onto or you're not trying to scoop them back, but you're just watching and allowing them to float out onto the ocean of your mind. As we begin to transition back to the space, I encourage you to just shift your attention back to the seat. Again, noticing the weight of the body, noticing the seat under you. Again, allowing your energetic body to spread out, to take up space with the physical body. Shifting your attention now deeper into the earth, remembering the earth, being held by the earth again, letting the earth ground you, bring you back into the moment and hold you. We turn our attention back to this energy of gratitude, sharing this energy of gratitude down into the earth, thanking the earth for supporting us, sharing this energy of gratitude into our breath, thanking the breath for supporting us, sharing this energy of gratitude into our minds, thanking our minds for having the seed of enlightenment that we can pursue to get free. We turn this energy of gratitude out to our protectors, our guides, our benefactors, thanking them for protecting us and guiding us all the moments of our life. We turn this energy back into this higher cosmic universal consciousness, the nature of mind, or maybe Buddha nature, or the mother, or God. Offering our gratitude back to this higher consciousness. Finally, we offer this gratitude back to ourselves, to our bodies. We offer it to our efforts and our intentions to get free. And lastly, we turn this energy of gratitude out into the world to all beings, wishing that all beings right now have what they need in order to feel safe. That all beings have what they need in order to breathe. That all beings have what they need in order to simply be free. May we all be free. Thank you all so much for your practice this morning, or afternoon, depending on where you're at. So yeah, welcome everyone who came in during the practice. This is our conversation around going to the edge, working with the edge, and this is a very timely exploration. It is always timely. No matter what we're going through, it is always timely to talk about this. I have been listening to Tupac this morning, so like that's where I'm at. That's the elder who came for me this morning was Tupac. Yeah, shit's hard. Shit's hard. And I personally, had a really tough week here with just my own personal health issues, and then, the killing of George Floyd, and then how that for me has been very retriggering for me to, I used to think how enlightened I was, and then shit happens and I'm like, oh. And then you fall right back, you go right back to the edge. And this is what I'm working with in terms, when I talk about the edge, I'm just really I'm talking about dancing in this place where I'm just like, I don't know what's happening. I don't know what's going on, but everything's rising, And the only thing that I can do is remember the earth, remember the mother, remember the breath, remember my benefactors, my guides, right? I remember my teachers. Because in reality, I'm always on the edge. This is samsara. This is the cyclical, kind of existence where we're just going in and out of these kinds of births and rebirths, without consent, often, and it's always precarious. And I remember growing up, and one of the things I suffered with and struggled with growing up was just like the lack of predictability of life, really the impermanence. I didn't call it impermanence when I was younger, of course, but it's just like, how can you possibly be well and happy when you have no idea what's going to happen in the next second. You know, and what's keeping me well and safe when there's so many people around me who are just, you know, just dropping dead. You know, and I had to work with that when I was young. You know, I had friends who were just, you know, they were taking their lives, their own lives. I had friends who were walking around sick and not even knowing it and just would die. And I was just, as a teenager, I would just be like, what's the point? Like, how do we survive this, right? Um, and I don't know how I survived it. I mean, I have a lot of, you know, I can assume a lot of things considering where I'm at now, but back then I had no structure to actually make sense or to make meaning of things. I just felt powerless, you know, and that sense of like spiritual ultimate powerlessness tuned right into how I felt powerless socially, you know, as someone who grew up black and queer and poor, you know, how I lived both in so many ways feeling like I had no agency, you know. Um, and of course, all of that was around death as well, you know. Um, and it was, you know, and it was death actually that became the edge that I had to work with and had to dance with. It was really death. It was really my unresolved issues around dying. It was that was where I needed to go with my practice, to go to the fear, to really start consuming the fear of dying, you know. But before I got there, I had to also learn how to connect to and tune into sources of love around me, because it was the love that held my leaning into working with death and dying. Um, so I'll stop there. So I've been talking a lot, and I'll invite Justin into this.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Rod. Yeah, I mean, for me, and my spiritual growth and path, I mean, death has been a big part of my kind of relating to Dharma. My root teacher, Lama Lama, I met her. It was an amazing experience, and then shortly afterwards, I learned that she was quite ill and had to, um, joyfully kind of be involved in her caretaking her last year of her life. And then I wasn't able to be in the same part of India where she was when she died. She was up in Sikkim and I was in Bodh Gaya with Bogrom Che. But then Bogrom Che died, and another very close teacher of mine died. And each time I kind of had to go through this process of understanding how these relationships continue, and this kind of is really similar to ancestor work, where when our teachers die, it's not that they leave, but it takes a good amount of work on our part to understand how to remain in relationship to them, so that even now there's the ability to have this close relationship with these teachers, with some additions on Bokram and Patingan. And then, of course, then I became a hospice chaplain and was witness to, hundreds of deaths at the bedside. And in that particular moment, for about 3.5 years, like what I ended up kind of focusing on is learning to understand the dying process, and that within this thing, we like to call death, and that we tend to be very, almost like naturally very scared of. There's immense beauty, there's immense power, there is also immense fear and anxiety in sitting with people going through that process and being with them and then studying, practicing the Tibetan related teachings or Vajrayana teachings around death helped to show me the power that's in death. That's exactly the same kind of power that's in childhood. And similarly, I mean, I tend to think of being with death is being on the margins. It's walking that liminal space that is scary for us, and it forces us to confront our fear of no longer existing, the fear of being anonymous, the fear of leaving those we love, the fear of not feeling like we have the resources to get through the next moment. And that's hard. It's really painful work. So I'm kind of very heavily, deeply rooted in this, and then now, and I've said this before, some of the work I'm doing for New York City is being witness to and blessing the bodies of those who have died of COVID, who are being buried in the city's Potter's Field, and that is incredibly powerful work, and also incredibly tragic. I feel overwhelmed because of George Floyd's death and the pain. You see this like wounds being ripped open across the country, and then I myself find myself kind of just completely unable to. I'm basically kind of like just trying to understand all of the death that's happened in New York City over the past 2 months. So it's very alive for me, and yet, like I think one of the reasons why Rod and I wanted to offer this segment is that there's such fertile ground here that we need to embrace, because people are so scared of even talking about death, considering death, and then also the thing that really kind of really bothers me around George Floyd's death and death where death rooted in violence is that the other side of this is that the beautiful experience of death is stolen, and somebody is murdered violently. That kind of, again, being with many people and their families who are, when the individual is actively dying, there's so much power for life review, for creating meaning, for connecting to faith, for expressing love, right kind of at the end. And when people die violent deaths, that is often taken from them, which makes it even worse. And which is just, within the Buddhist conception of like the dying process, these kinds of fast, sudden, violent deaths are considered less auspicious, because it's harder sometimes to move into the next moment without being completely wrapped up by disturbing emotions. And I cannot imagine, what his emotion was in that moment, which is what makes it so painful. To think about, it's like it's really intense. So, I think part of my hope for having this conversation is to be able to help with some resources and meaning making in relationship to that, and then learning how to find love and power on the margins, because the Sangha is on the margins. And many great Dharma teachers within the Buddhist tradition and in other religious traditions, their teachers have been able to be great and manifest their greatness because they chose to live on the margins. That it, there's power in being able to be creative on the margins. And you can be more creative on the margins than in the center of orthodoxy. And that's something that I feel intensely passionate about. That may we never occupy the center space, because that's that's where like all of the stupid stuff, the worries about orthodoxy come into play, and I'm just not interested in that. I'm interested in awakening and liberation, by any means possible, really. And that happens more easily at the edges because we can play with so much, and we can touch, so much that is real. That's mine.
Yeah. Well, Justin, that was something really important that you kind of offered, which was like being resourced and having what we need to move on to the next second, to move on to whatever we're facing, to whatever's arising. And so many of us right now don't feel resourced at all. Like some of us don't actually know what to do with all the fear, that's coming up,
Yeah.
And so we fall back into the anger and the rage as this vehicle, this really dynamic, intense vehicle of energy that pushes through everything. But it's not enough love holding, that kind of falling back into anger. I don't, in terms of resources, anger is one of my resources, but it's not one of my refuges. And that's a difference for me. It's like I have sources of refuge and I have resources. Now refuge is also a resource, but a resource is not a refuge. And for me, love is both a refuge and a resource, and the love is what holds how I relate to anger and how I'll fall back into anger as a vehicle. But that, all this takes a significant amount of practice to access for us. And so often, with folks that, that I work with and encounter in the world now, it's like people want a magic potion, so like you just want to get something and drink it, especially New Yorkers. I've noticed this in New York when I've talked there. It's always at the end of a talk, someone stands up and says, but can you just give us the Cliff Notes, And then, of course, the Cliff Notes are sit your fucking ass down and watch your mind. That's the Cliff Notes, That is like the essence of all of my Dharma, because that's the only thing I've ever done, is watch my mind in order to understand my mind, in order to have agency over the material of my mind, to have agency over the fear. I have to look at the fear and unravel the fear through my awareness, and you can't get free if you're always avoiding watching and being with everything, like you can't, it's like the bear hunt, right? You can't go over, you can't go around it, you can't go through it. You can't go under it, around it, or over it. You have to go through it. And to go through it, this is when we call our sources of refuge to take care of us. And then we call in our resources to actually support us as we move through the fear, move through the trauma, move through the terror. And for me, growing up Black and queer and poor and fat, one of the hardest things I've had to do in my practice is to admit that I was born into a social context that has been trying to kill me since the day I was born. It's tried to kill me through the education system. It's tried to kill me through the medical system. It's tried to kill me, just walking down the fucking street sometimes, you know? Um, like a system and a context that doesn't want me. And I've had to do this really grueling work to actually touch into the ways in which I've been loved and experienced love, and how that love has become a resource for me. The ways in which I've been able to use love to restore a sense of worth, a sense of validation, to use that love to let go of my need to argue that I deserve to be here. That's no longer an argument for me. There's no longer a conversation I have anymore because um, I don't have to argue for my right to be here, to exist anymore. And that's how I learned to protect my energy. But so many of us, so many Black and brown folks and queer and trans folks, BIPOC, QT BIPOC folks, many of us are so depleted, because we haven't been able to get the love that we've needed to survive and to be healthy, nor have we been able to actually take in the love that's been expressed to us, because we have found love to be very conditional, meaning that love has been, in my experience, has been an act of terrorism. Conditional love has been an act of terrorism in my life, and that made it very difficult for me to relate to love when I started practicing. I'm still, I'm still working through, I'm still cutting through, I still have so much work to do, and I know what that work is. I can, the love that I've been able to receive from those around me, and the love that I've been able to generate for myself are the resources, is the number one resource and sense of and refuge that has helped me to survive. And this is the same thing that's helping me to survive this week.
Brad, as you talk about that, I was kind of struck by this kind of idea of this dualistic relationship between love and emptiness, where a lot of white practitioners will kind of go, rather than go to love, because there's no shortage of love, that they'll go to emptiness to kind of cut through the pain and the discomfort and the horror behind these events, which is, it discounts people's experience. Like I recently got into this event. I try and avoid Facebook because I kind of always seem to garner conflict on it. And there was a Dharma teacher who's just kind of spouting all of this bullshit that was very racist. And he was arguing from this pure emptiness perspective, ultimate truth, where at the end of the day none of these things matter, and that is an act of violence. And it's fascinating to me when we watch, especially in Dharma communities, the way we talk about events like the killing of George Floyd or any kind of injustice. It's very easy to see white practitioners kind of go towards this emptiness response as a way of explaining away the what's happened. And I'm just struck by kind of this difference that exists, where even though on some level, I guess we could say white people are more conditioned to accept and know that there's love around them,
Mhm.
there's such this like inability to appreciate it, which is even worse. It's like having all the resources,
Mhm.
taking them for granted, and then maybe not even being able to see them. Whereas there are, the majority of the world doesn't have those resources necessarily in relationship to power automatically, um, and that's also what makes having these conversations, especially in Dharma settings, really fraught, which is also very ironic given the fact that in theory, communities are supposed to be built around the loving of one another. Um, and so, I don't have any like solution, but I was just like, love and validation versus emptiness and a predilection for like intellectual wisdom.
Mhm.
Um, I guess the question is how can they both be blended
Yeah.
skillfully
Yeah.
to resource both sides?
Yeah.
Because you have all these white people who, like, in theory, have positive intentions, but how it comes out and is demonstrated is
Yeah.
completely tone deaf,
Yeah.
and or incredibly violent and oppressive.
Yeah. And there's a way in which kind of mainstream Dharma in this country, I also say in the UK, because I'm very familiar with Dharma in the UK as well. I teach a lot in the UK. And I think in both here and there, there's a way in which there are these really celebrated white identified teachers who the establishment always goes to for everything. You know, like I love, for instance, I love Pema Children. But Pema Children has nothing to tell me right now about how to survive a Black queer body. You know, like I'm just being honest about that. And there's that level of violence when white teachers attempt to offer Dharma to something that they have no understanding of.
Mm-hmm.
Instead of saying, I don't get this, it's not my experience. Instead of saying that, they just offer this kind of emptiness in teaching, which I feel is harm.
Yeah,
You
I
know,
agree, 100%.
what would be so beneficial for me is for a teacher to say, you know what, I'm not Black, I'm not queer, I'm not trans, so I have a very limited experience of this.
Yeah, well,
You
I'll
know,
say that.
you know? And then you pass the mic to a teacher who can speak on it. Um, yeah, there is. I get this. Sometimes I get pushback. I mean, I know that's a surprise, but I get this pushback from teachers like in the wellness spiritual industrial complex teachers, right? And they're like, oh, Amarad, why can't you just talk about abundance and the light and the source, you know? And the problem with that is that you have to earn your right to get there, and you haven't. All you do is talk about it. I'm trying to teach a dharma that helps people earn the experience of touching into abundance by first touching into the ground of reality, by touching into the ground of identity and power and structures and hierarchies, to like touch into this ground to understand what the ground of this is and to allow your heart to break around all the ways in which you've been participating in something which has created harm for yourself and so many other people. When your heart breaks, that's when the door opens into the ultimate. That's when you earn it, And when you start talking about abundance and source and all of this, then like you will talk about that in a way in which your body and your mind will remember the scars, the struggle of getting there. Like you just won't talk about it so casually. When I talk about the mother, I am also talking about my trauma and my pain and my woundedness that she is showing up in So there's a heaviness when I talk about the mother, when I invoke the mother. When I invoke the mother, but when we do, when we do Matara practice, Matara, kicks my ass every time. Like that's why we only do it every 2 weeks, because I have to recover, because the practice brings everything to the forefront for myself and for many of us in the practice and the teaching, right? It brings everything up, and that's the only way I can earn my right to touch into the nature of the mother, by first touching into the nature of the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think really similarly, just for the kind of traditional death practices you find in Vajrayana, like Paula and things like that, those things get offered with the same kind of like convenience. Well, oh, that's a good practice for me to have for my death or the death of loved ones or whoever.
Mm-hmm.
Let me go get it. And there's none of that experience behind. Or often, I shouldn't say always, but there's often not a lot of experience behind that, the work involved in those practices. So it's similar. I mean, to be able to work with death is to immediately face fears around mortality, around sickness, around violence, right? Because so many deaths are violent. Disease, pain, intense suffering, and if you haven't done that work, death work becomes it's death work in name only. There's no power behind it. And I guess this is the word. There's no authenticity, because we're just kind of making stuff up, based on a projected desire to want to be able to serve under those capacities or ground.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Do you want to see if anybody has any questions?
Yeah, I'm just looking at questions now. Actually, that's why I went silent.
Mm-hmm.
And and Hope, I'll start with the top of what I see. Hope, you talk about spiritual bypassing in white communities. So I've been doing this reading on Instagram from the book, From Love and Rage, about the weaponizing of kindness. And that's a huge thing we haven't even talked about in these spiritual communities that white people use to kind of like bypass the issues of justice. So in Radical Dharma, which I'll probably start reading from Radical Dharma too, because that book is being called back into the mainstream as well. But in Radical Dharma, like part of my struggle was during Ferguson, how white practitioners, when I started talking about my struggle with everything, and that they would just be like, "Oh, Lama Rod, we love you," and I can't believe I'm still having to say this. Was it 6 years? 6 years now since Ferguson. I'm still having to talk about that and call it out as a strategy white folks are using to bypass their own discomfort and to erase me. Because if you really loved me, then you would be on your front lines working with dismantling whiteness, instead of like asking me to point it out for you, But now, like for me, it's evolved into, for Love and Rage, like really talking about how kindness in general is weaponized, to erase people, and it makes white folks feel really comfortable. If I can just be really nice to you, and then I won't, then I'll come out of this looking really good, and performing this kind of like concern, which I'm really not concerned, because this isn't even phasing me. Because I'm not, I'm this, I don't want to say anything specifically, but like I'm this middle-aged white woman. Of course the state isn't trying to annihilate me, so why do I care? And that's the energy that I get back from white folks. It's like, Um, like why? Like this obviously doesn't impact me. You know. Um, and so the kindness for me, I receive the kindness. Just it's hard. You know.
It's hollow.
Yeah, I'd rather people. To be honest, I'd rather people say fuck off Lamara instead of like being nice and using that niceness, that kindness to hide
Mhm.
their discomfort. At least I know. At least I know where you're at. You know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, and in Canada as well, Astrid. I have talked so much about niceness in Canada
Mm.
to Canadians. I like that's like every time I teach in Canada, like I'm like, don't you realize that like this is a really violent country, you know? But you never Canadians never name the violence that they experience in terms of like kindness and politeness because they always like bypass it and talk about how violent Americans are.
Mhm.
And it's the whole thing, it's like, oh, at least we're not Americans, you know? But I'm experiencing this. I used to teach these retreats in Canada, not the one I just did in February, but like just in the previous years before, where it was just like I would barely survive
Mm.
the ways in which kindness is weaponized to erase people. You know, where there's like a fixation on being nice and kind and being Canadian, you know. And I was just like, this is just bullshit. You know, you're very much like America, you know, but you just excel at putting a layer of this thing over how y'all are, you know, you know, in relationship to one another, you know. So anyhow, there's oh, there's a question box. Oh, Reverend Angel Kyoto Win spoke brilliant on social individual pathology of life and flexible zone. Yep. So please, thank you, George, for posting that. Please, you know, check out Reverend Angel, who is always doing incredible work around this. And maybe we may all get together and do a radical Dharma thing at some point, but I think we're all just super busy on different fronts right now. But um, yeah, you know, there is. Um, I guess it always comes back to the work, like to the work, always the work, you know. Like we have to commit ourselves to just working, you know. Um, like what is our work, you know, and how do we just make our work our lives? Like how can we make our work just what we're doing, you know, to get free and to get other people free, you know. Um, mhm. And there's much more for us that will happen too in the world, you know. You know, there's going to be so much more for us to hold as we move forward. It's not just the collective struggle, but it's also our individual struggles in life. You know, both of those are coming together for us, you know. But there is, like, what I guarantee you, you know, is that there's another side to this. We're moving to something else. You know, this is why I think about Tara now. Like Tara, you know, Tara means star, right? And like her early practices and cults and people who were coming into relationship with her, it was really around navigation too. She was seen as, a practice that guides us from one place to another. And I think this is why Tara, is always strong for me, but Tara really shows up very strongly for me. The mother in the form of Tara shows up really strong for me in these periods because it's about transition. Like I am moving from one place. We're just in the middle of the ocean trying to get to another land right now. But we're on this ocean and it's like stormy and wavy and like we're seasick, you know. But we are going somewhere else, but we have to survive the journey. And the journey itself, the work and the journey, and that is actually going to get us to the other side. You know, and it won't always be such a struggle, but we also have to use this time to actually develop the capacity to hold vast amounts of struggle right now. If we're in spaces where the struggle is being denied, that's not the space for you to be in. Actually, if you choose to stay in spaces where people bypass the struggle, then you become part of perpetuating the bypassing. You know, you have to. We have to start drawing lines here. you know, um, because literally, like some of these groups and organizations and whatever we're a part of, they're like sinking ships right now. Like either you stay on that ship or you hop in a lifeboat and go somewhere else. But some of these places weren't worth going down with it. Dying community. The communities are dying because their dharma, their teachings aren't resilient. The teachings in dharma are about comforts, and that's the thing that we're not able to access really right now is comfort. So that goes all these teachings about centering comfort out the door.
And we're not going to have comfort for a long time.
Yeah.
I was kind of reflecting on what you were saying about getting to the other side, and I think that, ultimately I agree, and yet the other side may not be a place here on this earth. That like it's hard sometimes to kind of remember that some of these outcomes depend on people working together and being able to be in relationship. And yeah, it remains to be seen whether or not we could do that. But I agree that now more than any other time, we have a tremendous amount of work to do because these times are so fertile, because they're so hard and painful and confusing. Where we end up, though, is another story.
Yeah, where we're going may not even be on this earth or in this reality or in this body.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's some questions in the question box.
Oh, okay.
So one from Javier. Let me go back to it. Right. Did it go away? Oh, yeah. How do I start the harsh work of touching the ground of identity when I've settled for accepting the identities placed on me as a matter of survival? It feels as if I've lived as a shell or a sponge for so long and disregarding my cultural and personal identity for others or just a systemic convenience. I'm not sure I can trust myself as me. What do you think, Rod?
Let's see. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Like the question keeps disappearing in the question box. So that's from Javier. hmm I'm not sure I can trust myself as me. And yeah, that's the impact of colonization for people of color. That like we've been taught that like we have to displace our most authentic expression in order to assimilate, to survive. And that's just an illusion because we're not assimilating, we're not surviving, we're still being deeply marginalized and receive a lot of violence, regardless of how much we assimilate and distance ourselves um, from like our roots, like cultural identities. Um, for me, you know, and this is like, for me, it's been about surrounding myself with people who embody this fierce, uh, you know, loving, prideful, identity that's lacking for me. For me, particularly, thinking about being Black and queer, it's been about surrounding myself with Black queer folks who are just so rooted in their identity. You know, it's when I started developing a relationship with Erica Huggins, who some of you know. Erica um, was one of the original leaders of the Black Panthers, in the '60s, and we started developing a relationship, and we started doing stuff together, like programs out in Oakland. And as one of my elders, the ways in which she deeply embodied Blackness, queerness, but also compassion and love was so restorative for me. And the same thing with Reverend Angel as well. The way that like my relationship with her over these years has been so grounding for me and helping me to return back to reclaiming Blackness and queerness within Dharma communities, which used to just like erase me. Um, it's been so incredibly important just to surround yourself, to be in a relationship with folks who can mirror back these parts of who you are, but also to mirror these identities back in a way that there's space around the identity. Like I'm Black and queer and poor and all these things, but that's not the totality of who I am. But these identities are experiences that have a lot of meaning and they're relative. But the spaciousness I have in and around these identities helps me to also have a view of the ultimate, you know, expression of these identities at the same time. So you're holding both together. Like these identities are important, but these identities aren't necessarily who I am at the same time. Um, the untangling process, yeah, the untangling process is tangled to self. Absolutely. Um, yeah, and you have to. This is again, I'm evoking Whitney Houston. It's not right, but it's okay. We have to actually go through this period of, as we are reclaiming these kind of social identities, we have to go through a period in which we will deeply disappoint the people around us who have relied on us not being our truest self. And then you're going to have to find new communities to be a part of and new friends and sometimes new family. You have to offer something to be free, to be who and what you are. You have to offer something, and that offering is often very heartbreaking. And sometimes we have to give up privilege as well, depending on our social location. Sometimes we have to like put that privilege, we have to like let go of that privilege as much as we can. Um, I know so many people who are actually queer, like they're like very much queer, but publicly they're like like straight performing heteronormative, performing, and they don't merge these private identities with their public identities because they're actually not interested in losing the privilege that comes from performing heteronormativity, and let's just say, I'll just say this, there are many more queer teachers, Dharma teachers, than you realize who are actually performing heteronormativity because of the privileges that they gain from that performance within Dharma and spiritual spaces. I'm not trying to be Wendy Williams here, so I'm not going to start naming people, but it's staggering how many people are choosing to stay in line with privilege instead of embracing a truer identity. So the step for queers, it really is, and it's really it's like, I just have a problem when people are teachers and they don't bring their full selves to the teaching. When they don't bring their complete self, I just feel like it's just a lie. Um, so I don't know. So Sam says, something I see a lot right now, a bit like weaponizing kindness, is weaponizing the idea of nonviolence. I think of myself as a nonviolent person, but I think sometimes denying the necessity of violence, refusing to properly work through it, is harmful. How can we think about violence skillfully, taking in all of its meanings? Well, again, when we have white dominant spiritual communities, spiritual communities don't understand struggle. Like, they don't really get what struggle is. Of course, there's going to be like this kind of very black and white understanding of violence and nonviolence, but when you come from an identity of struggle or a community of struggle, then you understand that, like, violence sometimes, when used skillfully, is the only way you're going to get heard and seen, i.e. marching through a city and burning down buildings. And there are, there are some Black Dharma teachers hopping on social media, talking shit about that, and I'm trying to stay out of it. I have too much on my plate right now to start going after people, but, it's just a way I see some of these Black teachers catering to, like, the white communities, that support them. And I've talked a lot about violence. I talk about violence a little bit, in Love and Rage. I talk about it online on Instagram too, in the talks that I do there. It's like, violence sometimes is the only way people will listen to you. It's the only way people will get their knee off of your neck, only if you can hit back and shove them back and say, what the fuck are you doing? Get your knee off of my neck. When someone has their knee on your neck, the thing to do isn't necessarily to sit around and pray for the deep well-being of the person who has their knee on your neck. This is what white dominant communities are doing. It's like, well, we're going to sit and pray. And generate compassion. Well, the most compassionate thing is for me to, like, punch you in the gut. Because punching you in the gut actually is going to de-escalate violence for all of us. That's the nuance of violence, right? I'm not engaging in violence because I want to hurt people or I'm trying to get back at people. I'm engaging in violence because, one, I'm trying to protect myself. I'm trying to protect the people that I love. And I'm also trying to get you to understand that you're out of fucking control. If this target has to burn down for you to understand that I am suffocating in a system, then that target has to go there. You know, people care more about buildings than they care about systematic oppression and marginalization of people in this country. And that's why we're in the dark age, because materialism outweighs the value of human life. You know. Yeah, and Javier, you're right. You know, you're going to piss people off. You know how many people I piss off regularly by opening my mouth, which I have come to love. Um, like I have like reaction videos to me on YouTube. It's like so interesting, you know. But like if everyone likes you, then you have a problem. Like if you're a teacher and everyone likes you, then I think your integrity has been compromised. You know, and this is my belief, but like I'm not trying to be everyone's teacher. And I think there are teachers who are trying to be widely accessible and popular. And I just think that's a compromise of integrity. You're actually performing something. I have very, particular views on things, and I'm not interested in compromising those views in order to gain, followers on social media. It's the people who are like, they're teachers. I'm just thinking about teachers specifically, but there's just teachers who I'm like, you actually don't know what they believe. You actually don't know what they stand for. And I can't trust that.
They're more of a brand, right?
They're a brand.
Yeah.
They're a brand. Then, people come to me or Justin and they're like, you guys are outliers, or you're, cult leaders, or you're like these Buddhist evangelists, which none of that is really like offensive to me.
Mm-hmm.
I think that says a lot when being called a cult leader isn't offensive. I mean, I have to maybe check that out a little bit. I've been called worse than a cult leader. But yeah, they're like, oh, you're like so like, you're on this edge. You're just doing this weird thing and you're making stuff up. No, it's about being really invested in practice and allowing the practice to take you into the places you need to go, because this is about evolution. This is about growing. This is about movement. This is when you become a devotee of the mother. The mother is about fluidity. It's about movement. She's about dancing. She's about breaking through containers and walls, right? She's not rigid. She's not contained, right? The mother is taking us from one shore to another. And if you can't get with that transition, if you can't get with the journey, then don't get with the mother then. Mm-hmm. Like I have no idea what's happening to me. I have a fucking harmonium here. You want to hear it? Like it's beautiful. I mean, why do I have a harmonium? Like this is you. If you choose to get on this train, you have to let the train take you to where you need to be, and you will lose things. Like you will lose things. I remember, I think about the poem by Naomi Sharab Nye. Yeah, Nye. Called Kindness. Ironically, it's called Kindness, but it's the most heartbreaking poem about kindness that like I've ever read. But she was like, if you do this, if you want to be really kind, you're going to lose things, right? And of course she wrote the poem after being kidnapped and being held hostage. I think Venezuela or Colombia, I think in the 70s. She wrote this poem afterwards. She was like, this is the heartbreaking side of keeping the heart open. when you're just like in these really intense situations. And that's the kind of kindness I'm talking about, rounding back. It's like the kindness that, like my kindness is about the recognition first that I'm hurting as well. And my kindness is holding space for your hurt. That's what I mean by kindness. Not bypassing my hurt and my trauma, and trying to use kindness to get out of the situation, of your pain reminding me of my pain. That's violence. Right? Before you know kindness as the deepest thing inside, you must know the sorrow as the other deepest thing. This both the sorrow and the kindness, they live together.
That's like in the Hindu tradition, the Das Mahavidyas, like all the different forms of the mother. You have everything from the most peaceful, generative, like typical mother image, in Parvati, all the way to Kali and Chamunda, who are destructive and represent that kind of fierce power. And I think the thing that I can't speak for Rod, but that I find incredibly meaningful in that model, and you see this also in kind of straight Buddhist traditions like White Tara all the way to trauma, is that we have that whole range within us all the time. And just as the mother manifests in a form that's violent, we have to kind of understand for ourselves our relationship to violence, and then also internally where our activity in relationship to violence will be, and it will be different for all of us. Some can inhabit places that are violent beyond perhaps anything that we can feel habituated to, and others can't. And there's dharma in all of them. So I would be wary of anybody who just gives an absolute, and I think that ties also to the power in some of these more white dominant sanghas where absolutes are easy, and when it comes down to this kind of individual sifting through experience, which is what Rod and I are really committed to, this absolute view is violent towards trying to understand why Rod has a harmonium, or like I have like a Trishula collection, or Kali collection, or whatever. Or most of my practices now are Hindu inspired, and so it's not that it's because in order for each one of us to get liberated, we need to be ourselves. And I think that's part of the, like, maybe the resourcing that we can share is that it exists within us. And as Sangha, we have to support that. And we have to support ourselves going through the way we manifest, which sometimes might be terribly wrathful and other times, more docile. But we should be careful not to occupy only one place.
Mm-hmm. So Anjana, you have a question. So you feel like as teachers we are called on to speak so much, and sometimes we just really need to be quiet, and being still is the right speech for that moment. But there's so much pressure around that. How do we navigate this? Silence is a teacher. I'll qualify that. Silence can be a really incredible teacher if silence is used to create space and not to bypass the situation. Holding space is an incredible tool of liberation and support for people, but we have to use it skillfully. We actually have to actually hold space for ourselves and for others in the process of doing that, you know. And for me, that was, I'm sure Justin has a lot of experience with this as well, but just like I just listen to people sometimes. That's all the teaching that I do, because what people are really looking for is to be heard. And to be seen, to see someone only comes through the work of holding space. I can't see you if I'm not holding all your experiences in the moment.
And I think related to this, like for example, this teaching is there are some things I just can't speak to, and so there's holding space in that way as well. That like, what am I going to tell people of color about their experience? And so sometimes that silence is absolutely necessary, because otherwise it's this kind of just terrible, like self-aggrandizing thing to think that you can speak to the experience of other people when you don't have that experience as well.
Mm-hmm. Again, I think, Angela, it's like we think we always have to say something wise, or if we don't say something wise or attempt to say something wise, then we'll be seen as being ineffective or not, being whoever we think we are. And that comes from a deep insecurity. Again, we talk about the teachers that we're talking about who are always saying stuff, even though it doesn't line up with anything that people are going through. It's because they're so self-identified with the role of teacher and doing, But when we really connect to the mother in our practice, we know that the mother is about space. So when I am in spaciousness, I am deeply in the mother, and the mother is like holding the space for everything around me if I'm just really authentically connecting to that experience. Let the mother speak. And I know, Angela, you're like a devotee of the mother. Let the mother speak. Let Tarama speak, right? Akali Ma, let Durga Ma speak.
Mm-hmm.
Dimavati is speaking
Mm-hmm.
so strongly with me. It's heartbreaking. Dimavati, that's a different mother.
Yes, it is.
She is a different mother to work with, because it's the wisdom that comes out of deep heartbreak. Like Dimavati is in the heartbreak, she's in the isolation, but you have to journey to get there to meet her. Um, you know, um, yeah, Dimavati, she keeps saying my love is underneath the suffering. Yes, that's why she's so hard to be with, because she like she keeps saying, you have to come through this to touch me. you know it's like getting baited by a carrot. She's like, well, if you just come a little closer, I'll give you this carrot, but she keeps backing back, until you're like in the midst of it. And then that's when you just surrender to the brokenheartedness, and that's when she arises. Of course, I've been reading all of these pujas
Mm-hmm.
and practices about her, about how to really, summon her. It's far out. It's, um, like her worship is far out there. It's intense. Um, so, Tema, you have a question about white women, and bypassing something to do with the deep heartbreak we don't want to face by our own conditioning, which keeps us so disconnected from the truth, and about how different our experience is because of our whiteness. Is disconnected from ourselves, from other white people, from POC. Yeah. It's just my experience with white identified women. It's just like that loyalty to whiteness that disrupts, this kind of loyalty to understanding the interconnectedness of oppression around sexuality and gender, and how that connects to racial oppression as well. There's this book called, I think she is called They Were Her Property, is the name of the book. And it's about white women who owned slaves in the South, and that's a really interesting book, but I think one of the points that it makes is that, white women have often um, been one of the gatekeepers around white patriarchy, and white women have also been used, to discipline black folks as well. So there's the way in which white womanhood is held in purity, and how that's been protected by white patriarchy, and when that white purity has been breached by black folks, then that's been used as an excuse to retaliate. And I think white women have to step out of that pedestal of purity, of having no agency. I think there are many white women who lethally weld that violence against black bodies. And we saw this last week with Amy Cooper in Central Park, where she was like, I'm gonna call the police and say there's a black man who's being violent against me. That was intentional, because that's the secret weapon of white womanhood in the United States, is that at the end of the day, I can just say a black man touched me or harmed me, and that's my card. That's the thing I can use to get out of everything. I had some of you remember this actually. This was about, 17 years ago, 2002, 2003. Some of you don't remember this. This may stir up some memories. There was, in my hometown, Rome, Georgia, there was a situation, a case. It was actually one of my cousins, a distant cousin of mine, who was, they were in high school, and he was dating, someone his own age in high school, another white woman, young white female, and he was black. And the young lady's family found out that she was dating a black man, and then she made up this lie that she had been assaulted by my cousin, and that spurred a whole national thing, and Oprah had to get involved, and she had to come down and just really just try to work through it. And then of course everyone, he was convicted. I think he was convicted and served time, a little bit of time, but he was on his way to college. He got a full scholarship to go play football somewhere, but I think the girlfriend ended up just confessing. She was like, I totally made all this up. And it was just a big thing, for us back home. I wasn't living in Georgia at the time. I was already living up north. But that's just those stories reinforced the realities of these dynamics. And again, we saw it last week with Amy Cooper, how it's like, oh, okay, I can still use this one thing, to justify or to whatever. So I think one of the most terrifying things for white people in the United States is to be black. To have to embody, to actually be a black person in this country, because there's this unconscious and sometimes a very conscious realization of the toll of whiteness, the toll that whiteness has taken on Black folks here. Like it's okay to take the culture, but we will never be Black. Why would we do that? Um, and you have to deal with that. You have to ask yourself, why am I terrified of that? Well, because you're touching into the brutality of white supremacy and the way white supremacy collides with capitalism, patriarchy, militarism. Um, the mass incarceration system, the legal system, the medical system, the ways in which these systems, these institutions collide together to repress the well-being of Black Americans. And I would say Black folks across the diaspora as well, Caribbean Blacks, African Blacks, European Blacks as well. But I just speak about my location as a Black American, not to say that like my experience of a Black American is the total experience of the diaspora. But I've had those conversations with people in other parts of the diaspora. So, um, oh, Justin, there's a thing from Eddie here. Have you read it?
Yes, yeah. So Eddie writes, when I actually engage with a loss of privilege, I honestly find it terrifying. My white male socioeconomic privilege is shield against the denial of my humanness and vulnerability of existence. In really honest moments, giving up privilege feels like annihilation. And it is annihilation, in the way that we're conditioned. Especially, like I can say from my experience, the way I was raised and the level of expectation that was placed upon me to live up and do, whatever. It is kind of like not only an expectation that there would be, I would excel at something. It was that I just naturally would if I wanted that, and you know, I was kind of lucky to have a mother who would kind of push back about that, which is really painful though, as a kid and growing up, when you kind of recognize like I don't even want this thing, like you keep pushing. Like so, I'll say for example, in my family, my father, like when I was interested in just becoming interested in Buddhism, he's like, oh well, you'll be like the next Robert Thurman. He's like, I don't want that, and like I know where you're coming from is a place of love, but you know, that is not, that is just a projection of the privilege that I have access to and that you want me to propagate. And so in a very real way, you're absolutely right that giving up privilege might as well be an act of suicide for white people in the United States. And yet, like then the real work becomes, if I give this up, what is there? I'm still here. Like I'm, as a human, you know. It's almost a little bit like Chur, like after we offer our bodies, like what is the experience that arises in that moment? Where is the essence of mind? And I'm not saying that in this way to kind of dharma, make it like a dharma thing, but again, we've was like white men in particular, like have a very defined identity and a very defined relationship to where we should land, kind of like on the top of the pyramid at all times. And letting ourselves not occupy that space is a really important place for us to practice. And experimenting with that annihilation, like what is that like to lose power? What is that like to lose the ability to have access to other people's resources, and what is it like to take up more space or have your voice count more, just by nature of effect, of, what you're born into, and what this culture prefers, or privileges over other people. So I mean, I hear the pain and the frustration and the vulnerability, rather, um, and yet I think that as white people, that's what we need to experiment and practice with, is putting that down, asking for ourselves. And I think that there's actually a little bit of like resonance between what Rod was saying about there being more queer Dharma teachers, in actuality than people let themselves be. There is a lot of room to step into who we actually are. And this actually kind of connects with what Poppy was saying too, is like to just be us and try and put down a lot of the privilege that's just, kind of naturally rising, so to speak. It's a profound place for white people to practice. And it's that fear becomes, our shadow, and we need to embrace it. I mean, and thank you, Eddie. And I mean, I know what you mean to, feel that, like to feel that you're beyond all this, embedded embodied conditioning. And the crazy thing is it is almost, it's not innate, but it might as well be, because it's just constantly projected, and it becomes an awareness exercise to first notice, and then after the noticing, to then just put down and say, like, I don't need this, um, I don't want this, and I didn't consent to it either. I mean, just as much as people who are, it can be privileged to not have resources, they didn't consent to that. White people don't consent. They quickly consent to it when they realize the power they have. But when we talk about babies just being born, neither has the ability to consent, to anything that gets projected onto them from birth based on appearance. Is there a practice you want to bring, Rod, to this? We've got the time.
Yeah. We can do definitely a closing practice as well. Right. I just, I know I keep coming back to this over and over again, but we have to, like, we need to cultivate our sources of refuge. Like, we need, like, refuge. That's, we talk about, white folks talk about doing this work of undoing whiteness. You need refuge to do that, because that's not easy. I talk about the work around the trauma of blackness, and of course, any racialized person is a person in trauma. Like, racialization is just trauma, right? But when you're doing this work, you have to rely on something. You have to rely on something to hold you, in the process. And this is not going to be, this isn't work that's going to look good. I keep saying the same thing. I said it over and over again in Radical Dharma. I say it again, and Love and Rage. I say it all the time. The teaching is that, like, you can't privilege messy. I'm sorry, you can't privilege looking good. Like, you have to allow the space for messiness to do this work. You have to grieve. You have to grieve the harm.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I know some of you are like, oh, you know, particularly white folks, it's like, you know, I don't want to deal with my ancestors. You know, it's like that's just symptomatic of the ways you just don't want to deal with all this other stuff. You know, whiteness gives you options.
Mhm.
You know, and you, as my teacher used to say, as Nirla Rinpoche used to tell me all the time, listen, no choice. You know, I would be like, well, should I do this? Should I do that? What should I do? He would just look at me and just be like, no choice. No choice. You know what to do. You know, you just don't want to do it. You know, and that's the thing. Go where the pain is. You know, stop giving yourself choices. You want to be an ally. You know, let your heart break. You know, and then and again, it's like many white folks don't know what it means to struggle. You know, like I've known nothing but struggle in this body. And it's not like it's been a perpetual experience of suffering. I have a lot of spaciousness in the struggle, you know, but it's still struggle. Um, like none of it is easy. I just know what to do. You know, I'm just really good at doing what I need to do, but it's not easy. That's the only easy part about it. I know what to do about it. You know, but sitting with the heartbrokenness, opening to the heartbrokenness, leaning into the mother, um, you know, watching your mind, doing the work like that, that's just hard. You know, if it were easy, everyone would be doing it.
Mhm.
Um, and don't get so tricked by people who are giving you this really glossy, kind of well put together package of what spiritual practice looks like. That's just like I don't buy into that. You know, and I have friends, you know, not well, Dharma friends, but all, you know, just friends, you know, in the spiritual industrial complex. Um, and their branding is so beautiful, and I have to challenge them sometimes. I'm like, you're resting on pretty.
Mhm.
You know, if I can sum entire banks into this conversation, like you don't rest on pretty. You know, prettiness is just another impermanent thing that's going to pass. What doesn't pass is realization, is the awakening of the nature of our mind. That's permanent. You know? So rest in that. Don't rest on pretty. You know? um, so we're gonna start kind of wrapping up our time together. Um, so I want to thank everyone for showing up, just being here, and continuing to do this work with us. You know, Bhumi Sparsha is. I just want to always reiterate we're in process. Like we're emerging. You know, and you have to get with that. You know, and I know there's been troubles around like getting into the sessions and technology stuff, and of course that's just like you know many of us have never met each other, but we've come together over like this medium, you know, because of the circumstances that we're experiencing as a world now. And so we're trying to do the best that we can, but like one form of whiteness that expresses itself is this need for everything to be perfect, to be on time, to be rigid like that. And I know it's really frustrating when you know you can't get into something and the link doesn't work and you don't know who to talk to. I'm one of those people who can't get into rooms sometimes. I'm actually one teaching the session. Like I get it. Um, but that's when you have to allow the mother to come and hold you and just be like, it's okay, you know, it's okay. It's really frustrating and it's okay.
Mhm.
You know, if you need it to be better, you know, what I can say is that like I don't know if it will be better, you know, and then you have to mourn the difference, right? You have to mourn what you want and what's actually happening. And you have to like bridge the gap in between both of these, and you have to hold space for it, and then you have to make a decision about if you want to deal with this bullshit or not.
Mhm.
Just being really honest. you know like, you can come in and you can leave. Like, this is not that, we're not that kind of cult. you know we would be well more organized if we were a cult. But yeah, it's just like, you have to figure out if this is what you need and can deal with. you know
I also just want to chime in. I mean, Rod and I are on Slack, and we make ourselves available.
hmm
And but we're also engaged in hard work, and sometimes holding the space for where this experiment goes, and how we emerge, um, is exhausting. So by all means, be in touch, and also know that we also need to maintain our resources, and can't always respond immediately.
hmm
Um, Even though sometimes there's that burning need, um, which makes us need response immediately. Um, we're here and we hear you and we see you, but we can't always drop whatever it is that we're doing,
yeah,
um, as we're responding to other people who are often in great pain and suffering.
yeah, yeah. So having said that, we are meeting at 5 o'clock, um, Eastern Standard Time. So we're meeting again in 4.5 hours or so, to do our Mahamudra set. So that's definitely happening today. Okay. So let's just begin. We can do just a really super quick practice. And I just invite you to again turn your attention back into the space. And just noticing if you're different than you were when we first began the conversation. And what's different? Is there new energy, new thoughts, new emotions? Does anything feel settled? Does something feel stirred up? I'm just holding space for that, for whatever is arising, holding it by just looking at it, not reacting. Now dropping your attention to your seat again, noticing the weight of the body, noticing the sensations of your body making contact with the seat. Again, letting our energetic bodies spread out, letting our energetic bodies take up space on the seat. Now dropping our attention into the earth again, acknowledging the earth, thanking the earth for holding us during this session. And as the earth is opening up under us as this resource and refuge, I invite you to turn your attention back to your breath. And if you feel resourced enough, I invite you to do a couple of cleansing breaths with me. But as we inhale, I want you to imagine that the inhale begins to dissolve and unlodge all the stuff that maybe you're struggling with. And as you exhale, imagine that you're exhaling down through the body into the earth. You're just pushing all of this, blowing all of this down into the earth for the earth to hold. And we're going to do this 3 times. Okay? So beginning with the first cleansing breath, breathing in, dissolving, dislodging things. And then as we exhale, exhaling everything down to the earth, letting the earth hold it. Okay. And just 2 more times at your own pace. And one more time. right? And then just shake it off, shake whatever's remaining off. Okay. Letting go of everything. Okay. Thank you all so much for your practice, for showing up, and we will continue our work together. And thank you all so much. It's been really incredible.